Galileo, Galileo Figaro.
He helps to change the way we view our place in the universe. Hello, and welcome to FactSam and another episode of Who, What, Why, Where, and When. In this episode, we'll explore the life and legacy of the astronomer Galileo Galilei. Let us begin. Galileo Galilei was born on 26th of February 1564 near Pisa, or 15th of February according to the Julian calendar, which was still in use at the time. He was the eldest child of Vincenzo Galilei, a famous lutenist and composer. It is probable that Galileo learned from an early age skepticism for established authority from his father, as well as the value of well-measured or quantified experimentation, an appreciation for periodic measure of time or rhythm, and the results expected from mathematics and experimentation. His family moved to Florence when he was 8, but Galileo stayed behind and studied with Jacopo Bocchini for 2 years. He was then educated at Vallombrosa Abbey from 1575 to 1578. Galileo considered going into priesthood as a young man, but his father urged him to go to university. Galileo enrolled at the University of Pisa in 1580. Galileo originally studied in medicine in order to pursue a career as a doctor, but in 1581 he observed the chandelier swinging and noticed that it took just as long to swing each way, no matter how far it had swung. These same observations would later be used by Christian Huygens 100 years later in order to create a timepiece. Around the same time as the chandelier observation, Galileo attended a lecture on geometry, after which he persuaded his father to allow him to study mathematics. Despite this change in career path, Galileo had to leave university in 1585 without a degree due to a lack of funds, spending the next 4 years teaching mathematics privately in Florence and Siena. Then, in 1589, despite not having a degree, Galileo took up a teaching position at Pisa. Whilst there, he was fined several times for refusing to wear the official robes, showing his attitudes towards authority. He taught at Pisa until 1592, when he was made chair of mathematics at University of Padua. Around 1595, he invented a geometric and military compass, having it mass-produced and giving lessons on its use, before publishing a manual in 1606. In 1602, he conducted an experiment with a pendulum to measure time increments. He explained his findings to Centurio, a doctor friend who then used them to measure patients' pulses. He observed Kepler's supernova in 1604, concluding that they were distant stars, and they disproved the Aristotelian belief. In 1609, after hearing about Hans Lippershey's telescope, Galileo built his own based solely on the description, and even managed to improve on Lippershey's design. Using this telescope between 1609 and 1610, Galileo made many observations and discoveries. These include seeing that the moon was not as smooth as many previously thought, discovering and observing some of the satellites of Jupiter, now known as Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. This was a major discovery, as it proved that not all bodies orbited the Earth. He discovered the Milky Way being comprised of many stars, as well as making observations about Saturn, sunspots, and the phases of Venus. He even used his telescope as a profitable sideline, selling them to sailors and astronomers. In 1610, he left his position at Padua and became the first philosopher and mathematician to the Duke of Tuscany. It was also around this time that Galileo's conflicts with the Church began. In March 1610, Galileo published the Starry Messenger, describing some of his observations. This was met by some with horror and disbelief, as it disproved the Church-supported ideas of Aristotle and Ptolemy, and supported those of Copernicus. In 1613, Galileo published the Sunspot Letters, in which he formally took his position on heliocentric theory. He also chose to write them in Italian rather than Latin, meaning they got a larger audience. By 1615, Galileo's writings had been submitted to the Roman Inquisition on the grounds that he was trying to reinterpret the Bible. This forced Galileo to go to Rome to defend his position. This failed, and in February 1616 the works of Copernicus were banned, and Galileo was formally warned to drop his support of heliocentrism. Galileo managed to keep out of trouble for a few years, and in 1624 travelled to Rome for an audience with the new Pope, Urban VIII, and several cardinals. Galileo had hoped to overturn the ruling from 1616. Whilst this did not happen, the Pope, who was a supporter of Galileo, did allow him to write about both sides of the argument, so long as he did not favour a particular side. He then spent the next few years mainly writing his dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, which was finished in 1630 and published in 1632. It follows three men: Salviati, a philosopher supporting Copernicism; Simplicio, a philosopher supporting Ptolemy and Aristotle; and Sagredo, a layman who is neutral. Over 4 days, the men discussed their views on the world. Whilst the book was meant to be a neutral discussion of the theories, there were some who saw it differently, and this was the start of Galileo's major problems.
Blasphemy! He said it again!
Some felt that the book was written in such a way as to support heliocentrism and Copernicism. They also felt that the name Simplicio, despite Galileo's claims that he was influenced by Simplicius of Cilicia, a 6th century commentator on Aristotle, was close to the Italian word simplice, meaning simple-minded. Galileo had also put some of the words of the Pope in Simplicio's arguments, losing the support of one of his biggest supporters in the process. Galileo was called to Rome to defend his writings, and in February 1633 stood trial on suspicion of heresy. After a lengthy trial and threatened with torture, Galileo was found guilty. He was sentenced on 22nd of June 1633 for holding the opinion that the sun was the centre of the universe rather than the earth, and for going against the Holy Scripture. The dialogue was banned, and Galileo was forbidden from publishing further works. He was initially sentenced to formal imprisonment, but this was changed to life house arrest the next day. Galileo returned to his home in Arceti near Florence, where he spent most of the remainder of his life. In 1637 he lost his eyesight, but not before writing and publishing Discourse concerning two new sciences in Holland, presumably to get around the ban from the Catholic Church. This new book summarised some of his earlier works on kinetics and strength of materials, and followed his changing beliefs as his research progressed. The book follows the same general pattern as his previous one, following the same 3 men over 4 days, discussing different areas of physics, chiefly ones Galileo had studied. Simplicio's arguments are representative of Galileo's early beliefs, Sagredo represents his middle period, and Salviati proposes Galileo's newest models. A major difference is that Simplicio was not shown to be a simple-minded. This work led to Galileo being called the father of modern physics, receiving high praise from many, particularly Albert Einstein. Just months before going blind, Galileo observed moon librations. After going blind, he asked the church if he could leave his home for medical reasons. This was refused, but he was allowed to leave his home to attend religious festivals. His health continued to decline, and after a long illness, Galileo died at his home on 8th of January 1642. Galileo has left a lasting legacy on the world and science. The 4 moons of Jupiter, which he discovered, are now categorized as the Galilean moons, and the first spacecraft in orbit of the planet was called the Galilean spacecraft. 2009 was officially named International Year of Astronomy by NASA in honour of the 4th century of Galileo's first observations with a telescope, and it even has a minor planet named after him, asteroid 697 Galilei. He even had an impact on the church. The Galileo affair was pretty much forgotten at his death, but the ban on reprinting of his work, except for the dialogue, was lifted in 1718 in order to publish a collection of his works. In 1758, the ban on all works of heliocentrism, other than the dialogue and Copernicus's De Revolutionibus, was lifted. These 2 works were eventually removed from the list in 1835. In the 19th century, Protestants used the affair in order to attack the Catholic Church. In 1939, Pope Pius XII described Galileo as one of the most audacious heroes of research, not afraid of the stumbling blocks and risks, nor fearful of the funeral monuments. In 1992, Pope John Paul II expressed regret over how the Galileo affair was handled. Thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video and would like to see more, then please like, comment and subscribe. If you're able to do so, then I would be grateful if you could support me on Patreon. By doing so, you will receive a variety of rewards depending on how much you donate, ranging from the opportunity to view my videos early to having a say in the topics of future videos. Even if you're unable to do this, just your view goes a long way to helping me grow this channel. Until next time, thank you again for watching. I've been Faxam, and I hope to see you again soon.